Hello, and welcome as we continue this journey toward the fifth Sunday after Pentecost, June the 27th, 2021, with these mini Bible studies. Hopefully you've been following along this week, or maybe even for quite some time. And I would invite you, if you would like, to leave a comment, a question, or a thought below the video, either on the YouTube channel or on our Facebook page, and that will notify me that you have left a comment, and then I could respond, or maybe we could start a conversation if you have questions or thoughts. Today we will be looking at the gospel reading for Sunday, which comes from St. Mark in the 5th chapter, verses 21 through 43. Glory to you, O Lord. I will read for you the introduction, and then the gospel reading itself, and then share some of the reflections that I've gathered for today. Jairus, a respected leader, begs Jesus to heal his daughter. A woman with a hemorrhage was considered ritually unclean and treated as an outcast. Both Jairus and the unnamed woman come to Jesus in faith, believing in his power to heal and bring life out of death. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little girl is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. A large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. We start today's gospel reading with verse 21, which reads, "When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side." One commentator suggests that the crossing to the other side that we've seen in these last couple of gospels is specific language for Mark's gospel to indicate that Jesus is crossing over cultural, social, spiritual, and possibly other boundaries and or norms, not simply crossing over the Sea of Galilee. In Mark chapter 4, verse 35, Jesus and the disciples crossed over the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which put them in Gentile territory, the country of Gerasenes, citizens who were culturally more Greek than Semitic. Immediately, as Jesus steps out of the boat, he is met by a man with unclean spirits. You may remember this story of Jesus casting out a legion of demons from this man, and at their request, sent them into a herd of pigs. The mention of pigs confirms that this was not a Jewish community. People came out from the village to see everything that was reported by the swine herders. The people see for themselves everything that has been done, and they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. To me, this is such an odd story to sandwich between the stories of Jesus among the crowds of Jewish people teaching in parables, and then back again among the crowds of Jewish people and the healings in today's story. Yet, when Jesus once again crossed over to the other side, returning to where they had just come from, Mark tells these two healing stories that are sandwiched together. Jesus leaves the man from whom a legion of demons was cast out and tells him to testify throughout the Decapolis, it just simply means 10 cities, to testify about Jesus and what Jesus had done for him, which the man does. Now Jesus and the disciples have once again crossed over to the other side, presumably back into Jewish territory in Galilee, and it seems that the crowd was still waiting for Jesus on the beach when the boat arrives. In just 22 verses, today's gospel reading, we learn that Jesus' healing can also be unintended, as in verse 30, Jesus asks, "Who touched my clothes?" We also learn that Jesus can resurrect a young girl who died while Jesus was detained because of a physical encounter with an unclean woman who was audacious enough to touch Jesus' clothing. In today's gospel reading, we see two more examples of how Jesus crosses over cultural and spiritual boundaries. In these verses that we skipped over, Jesus crossed over social, cultural, and spiritual boundaries by going among the Gentiles and having an encounter with a man possessed by unclean spirits. That alone would have made Jesus unclean, and no self-respecting Jew would have done this. In today's gospel, Jesus' clothing is touched by an unclean woman who was also forbidden to have any kind of contact with other Jews, causing this unintentional healing. And Jesus dares to have a conversation with her. Yikes! Not only does he have a conversation, he acknowledges her importance in the community as daughter and credits her with faith that has made her well. And this conversation delays Jesus from doing what a leader of the synagogue wants, which that would make Jesus' actions seem even more anti-cultural. The needs of a leader of the synagogue would be way more important than that of an unclean woman whom no self-respecting Jew would talk to in the first place, much less allow her to touch them. So much going on in these stories. While the healing of the woman may have been unintentional on Jesus' part, it certainly was not passive. There is a whole list of active participation on the part of the woman. Having suffered, having spent all of her money on doctors, having no benefit from any of it, having gotten worse, having heard about Jesus, having coming up from behind him and touching Jesus' clothes. So much activity. Verse 30 also tells us that Jesus was immediately aware that power had gone forth from him. Another activity. Jesus' power is tangible, and Jesus is immediately aware of it being used. The woman realized at once that her body was healed. The rest of the crowd maybe was not aware that any of this happened, yet the woman and Jesus were both aware of this activity. Unintended, not passive, very active. In the meantime, some people from Jairus' house, likely servants, come to him to inform him that his daughter has died and suggest that Jairus trouble the teacher no further. Perhaps it is because Jairus has just witnessed an unintentional healing in which Jesus commends the faith of an unclean woman, and Jesus tells Jairus, "Do not fear, only believe." Perhaps that's why Jairus continues with this. There's no mention of what Jairus is to believe. So we're left with the only conclusion that I can come up with. Jairus is to believe in a who, not a what, a who. Jesus. Okay, that distinction between what and who might seem to you like I'm arguing about semantics. Yet I challenge us to think about it more directly. When we talk about our faith, do we not more often talk about what we would like God and Jesus to do for us? Even in our prayers, do we not have a list of what we would like them to do for us? Perhaps, like I presume in today's gospel, Jesus is more concerned about the who of our faith. The unclean woman had exhausted all of the options of what she was able to do on her own, and now she turns in faith to a who. Jesus. In my humble opinion, Jairus, in the beginning at least, seems to be more focused on what from Jesus. Verse 23 tells us that Jairus begged Jesus repeatedly to come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. Now, some may say that coming to Jesus in the first place showed faith. Yes, I'm sure it did. Yet, I think it would be similar to the same faith that the woman showed in her doctors, that she spent all her money on. I would differentiate that from faith in Jesus as Son of God. I point to the comments of Jairus' servants as a proof text. Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? The teacher. That sounds to me like admitting defeat. Well, Jairus, you did the best you could. There's nothing more the teacher can do. Teacher. Can you imagine Jesus? Got a little smirk on his face with this whole thing? Yeah, well, I can anyway. Jesus' response in the face of this defeatist attitude is to say to Jairus, do not fear. Only believe. And when Jesus arrives at Jairus' house, the mourners laugh at him, which may also be a proof text for my assertion that their faith was limited to a what and could not grasp the who that stood among them. These remarkable stories in Mark chapter 5 of a demoniac, a young girl, and a persistent woman help us to see the range and the reach of this mystery that we call Jesus. If we focus only on the what that Jesus can fix on these mortal bodies, casting out unclean spirits, healing a long-suffering woman's bleeding, and resurrecting a young girl, all of those miraculous, absolutely. Yet if we focus only on the what, then we completely miss out on the who, the mystery that we call Jesus. Resurrection life that comes from God through Jesus is far more than simply fixing these mortal bodies. It's all about restoration of the relationship between creation, including humans, and God. Thank you for joining me today as we continue this journey along toward the fifth Sunday after Pentecost, June the 27th, 2021. Again, I encourage you to leave comments, questions, or thoughts in the comments section below this video. I hope you're having a great day. Take care, and God bless.